Welcome back to the Counsel and Commentary Podcast. And today we have a fantastic guest, Steve LaBriola. Did I pronounce it correctly?
You got it. Yes.
Perfect,
I'm part
perfect.
Italian.
Some of the best food on the planet, too. Well, welcome to the show. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, sure. Happy to be here and looking forward to chatting with you.
Perfect. And first, you want to just start with your a quick backstory about you and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess just quick background. While I said you must be part Italian, my mother's actually Irish, so we're all kind of Heinz 57. I grew up in Denver, Colorado. Went to University of Colorado as an undergrad, go Buffaloes. Then went to NYU, so went to the other side of the country for law school. Following law school, I clerked for a Colorado Supreme Court justice, and then I was a prosecutor for a number of years, trying criminal cases daily, living in the courtroom. Then I came and joined one of Atlanta's largest firms, and from that firm, a small group of us formed my current firm, Fellows LaBriola. We do only litigation. And within the firm, the litigation is probably 80% business litigation. So, I represent Hulu, Disney Plus, and OpenAI, ChatGPT, and other businesses and business disputes. But where I have, I think, become more well known in the last several years has been in catastrophic personal injury, wrongful death cases, plane crash cases, train car crash cases. We don't do any fender bender work. Um, and I try an awful lot of cases. So because of that, we've had some real success, and I tend to never let my other side outwork me. So that's kind of big picture. And we are a litigation boutique. So litigation's the only thing we do within the firm.
Perfect. Yeah, and I read on your website that you're real picky, and like whenever you want to hire an expert, you want to hire somebody that actually focuses and becomes very, just the top of the best. They focus on one specific, niche. What kind of made you want to become a personal injury attorney?
That's a great question. I don't think I ever did want to become that. It happened organically. So many years ago, I got asked by it was actually a lady who cut my hair, and her son had been killed um, by a food delivery truck. And so she was just desperate and was so upset. And I said, "Look, I'll look into it." And we began to look at the case. It was a very hard case because he had THC in his system. And for anybody who's looked at that, if you go back years ago, it was, before it could be legal, that was obviously a big strike against the case. And it also happened at dusk. And so there's a real question as to whether the person had his lights on, didn't have his lights on. I can remember making contact with a local weatherman in this rural area who happened to note the type of cloud each day that was out, and he found that there was an elongated twilight that evening. So we got the case. The attorney on the other side was a very skilled attorney, and it was not until we were literally on the courthouse steps, and in fact, frankly, it was actually inside the courtroom that the matter resolved. And before that, we had had some failed mediations, and I think it's just simply because I had tried cases, but it was very rewarding because it was emotional for the mother. And so many of the other cases that I handle, it's a breach of contract, it's a tortious interference, it's things where you're dealing with CEOs at the highest level and it's not personal to them. And here, when you have either a life altering injury or a death case, it becomes so much more meaningful, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So from there, the cases began through word of mouth to start to trickle in, and now I have enough where I just can pick and choose what I want to do. And I never want to get overwhelmed with too many of them, because when we get in a case, we really get in it. I will not be out experted, and we'll get the best experts in the country. Um, we invest heavily into them, and I think because the client knows that I personally want to do my absolute best in the case, I think they feel that. And so it's been just word of mouth, and it's something I really enjoy and love. And because of that, it's kind of like a labor of love, I guess.
Yeah, love that. What would be the most surprising thing people don't understand about your type of injury law?
I, you know, it, I've never polled them, so that's a good question. But I think that most of them do not understand the process and how involved it is. And so a lawsuit begins with the filing of a complaint. They get that. There's a suit and it gets filed. What they don't quite understand is that there is a discovery process, and it begins with written discovery. And so the written discovery usually takes several months, if not upwards of a year. It just depends on how involved it is. If it involves a lot of electronic data, so for instance, if you're dealing with a plane crash, if you're dealing with a train crash, if you're dealing with multiple vehicle pileups, you're going to have electronic data from each of those vehicles or from the aircraft or the train. All of that needs to be downloaded. So you'll oftentimes be working with governmental entities as well. And when you have a governmental entity, if they have a criminal case that's pending, then your case can be stayed for a period of time. And so you can try and get discovery on a number of areas, but then you have to start dealing with governmental entities to try and get it. Thereafter, you get through with the written discovery, then you go to depositions, which are where you get to sit down, you put somebody who's under oath, you have a court reporter present, a videographer present, and you then get to ask them questions under oath. That's all kind of standard. Most people get that. What they don't get are the number of experts that you need in complicated cases. And that can be anywhere from dealing with just accident reconstructionists. I had a case where the speed of a vehicle was critical, and we had the rear view mirror, actually, it was the side view mirror of a tractor trailer that was making a left hand turn. And our client was on his way home from work and became a quadriplegic. He underrode the trailer. The allegation of the driver was that he was speeding. We were able to show, because the frames of the dash cam inside of the truck captured through the side view mirror 2 frames of the vehicle. So I went to Georgia Tech, got the head of the physics department who dealt with calculation of speed of electrons. So this was kind of child's play for him, but it was still complicated because the truck was moving. So you had a moving truck that was also turning. So you had a number of variables that needed to be taken into account to then calculate the speed during those 2 frames of a vehicle. So that's just one expert. If it's a case, well, for instance, in that case, because it was a quadriplegia, we needed to put together a life care plan. He was in his early 50s. His life expectancy was going to take him into his mid 80s. It was shortened because quadriplegics don't live as long. So we went to Louisiana. We found a orthopedic surgeon who had been instrumental in compiling the CDC's data on quadriplegias at the University of Alabama, which is where the CDC maintains that information. So we will get the best experts. Clients don't quite get that. They don't understand that there's going to be this process where you have to go out and engage them. We actually flew that doctor to Georgia to meet with our client, the patient. He then put together a life care plan. Then you have to get an economist, because the doctor puts together to say, here's what he needs, here what the costs will be. The economist then has to put in inflation and then reduce it all back to present value. So that's just a quick example, but it can take a number of years. I had a case before um, COVID. It was in 2018 when it was filed. We were ready to try the case in February of 2020, which was pretty quick. then we got hijacked by COVID, and it finally got resolved after we got put back on a trial calendar in the fall of 2024. So it's the length of time that the serious cases take to try and get resolved.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, and I've always wondered what's the complexities behind like how they come up with the numbers. So that was a good example of how they put inflation, life expectancy, and all these different factors. See, always see the commercials. I was like, really? I mean, obviously, people it's hard to put a price on people's life, but like that's the dynamics behind it. So that's pretty fascinating. What's the biggest legal mistake people make right after an accident?
Um, I guess that's a good question. It is probably what I would call the dirty underbelly of the legal profession. There are what I would call bottom feeders who are at the unethical scale. And so I didn't realize this to the extent that it happened until my wife had been in an accident. It wasn't a serious thing, but we received probably 20, 30 letters and calls from runners for attorneys, and they just shouldn't be in the field. They should be disbarred. They shouldn't be around. But I guess I would say people don't know how to hire an attorney. And, there's a reason you drive down the freeway. I was heading up to trial 2 weeks ago, and I talked to the jury about this a little bit because I was thinking that it would be pervasive on the jury, and it was. I probably passed 50 billboards from my county to this county where it was that said things along the lines of get the money you deserve, made it seem like snap your finger and manna from heaven drops on your lap. And and that's not to say that there are not some good lawyers who advertise that way, but those are big volume shops. And so I think people, it's kind of like how do you select a doctor? It's similar here. How do you select a lawyer? What do you need to know? How do you do it? And a lot of people just go to the advertisers to do it. So to me, I would say not knowing who to represent you, not knowing the background of people, not looking and spending time investigating, not talking to other lawyers. And what they need to do is find out when's the last time you've tried a jury trial? When's the last time how many cases do you have? If you have somebody who has 100 cases, that's they're not going to spend the time of day with you, and so I don't know if that answers your question, but you may have been looking for something different. I don't think it's really anything at the scene. At the scene, somebody's hurt. The police all now have body cam, which is thank goodness for that. It's very helpful to try and determine whether or not you have a problem case or you don't have a problem case. And since we only deal in the catastrophic, we never are dealing with the people who are exaggerating or faking their injuries. They're real injuries with MRIs and CAT scans and all kinds of broken bones and severed spinal cords and things to be able to show. There's this is not a person holds their neck and says ooh ow and then does a jig afterwards. So we don't do any of those cases.
Yeah, that makes sense. What role does evidence like photos, medical records play in the outcome? I think you had some photos that you alluded to before the call. If you want to share your screen.
Yeah, hang on. Let me see if I can do it. So let me just show you. Let me see if I can pull up one here for you and hang on, my screen moved. Okay, here we go. Let me close out. It'll take me just a second here. So, all right. So what you are looking at here is an aerial photograph. It's not. It's a zoom photo, and then what you are actually seeing. The vehicles are not there. These are to scale vehicles in which we had what's known as a Faro scan done, and Faro um, is a 3D digital recording um, set of coordinates that is done by having a laser that reflects off of a series of balls, and you can put anything within it. So you can farrow, which we did in this case. We farrowed the road, we farrowed the vehicles. So we had a tractor trailer truck. It was done from the side angle. So what you're now looking at is the top down view, which is why the tractor trailer truck looks a little unusual. And the vehicle, you can see completely where it is. Those are to scale. And what it shows, if I go backwards just a little bit on this, is you can come back to show the precise resting position of the vehicle after impact. You can show gouge marks on the road. You can show yaw marks, which are tire marks that are caused by dragging and moving. You can put in videos and photos, and there you see where I have a 3D Faro that's mentioned, and you can have the vehicles. Well, we can place all of that precisely on the road to be able to reconstruct and allow accident reconstructionists to come in and also allow people who are dealing with it here. This I'm now showing you just a screenshot. We're going to show a little video of a drone that we did, because if you want to let somebody know how dangerous this intersection was, this will help show it. So you can now see that this is just a drone coming out over a road. You can see on the roadway, that's the police markings that you see in pink and green, and the different markings, and the what I showed you before included um, the replacement of the vehicle back on the road, because you've got to understand this is a busy um, sort of local highway that is 4 lanes with a divided highway. You can see now how tight that corner is. So a car coming around that corner doesn't have a lot of time to stop if a
Yeah.
tractor trailer is deciding it wants to make a left-hand turn, which it did during rush hour in this case. So we were trying to show vividly for a jury to bring it back and say, hey, this person had another alternate. He could have gone a different route, a different location. And instead he decided during rush hour traffic that might makes right. And just to kind of skim it and go through. Here you can see the drone operator is actually in the image. And so, that's kind of where it is. You can now see where I pulled up to show you, hey, here are photographs of the truck. Here's photographs of the vehicle that they had to cut the person out of it, and so it can slide through very quickly to be able to help show, hey, here are the markings. So when we went back and I showed you that aerial view coming back in and what the yaw marks meant and everything else, you then come back into here. So now I had shown you earlier the physical evidence, and you'll see if you look at number 1 where it says, what's the length of the yaw mark? Well, now we can tell the jury it's 43.4 feet. We can say what's to the area of impact, how is it 19 to 20 feet? Length of the stop sign 24 feet, so it's just a way of being able to um, persuasively help show a jury, hey, we've done our homework, and here's what it looks like. So that's an example.
Yeah, no, I love that. No, I had a story back, man, it was probably like 17 years ago. I got same kind of thing. A semi ran. He was familiar. He'd just been working the entire weekend. It was my day off from work, and I was driving the area, and I'm familiar with my neighborhood. And he went through an intersection, and I took off when the light turned green, and we both hit each other. Ended up, luckily, I was in a really like safe car, but and 3 witnesses said, yeah, he ran the red light. And then I didn't hire an attorney. I just said it was progressive. And they're like, oh, it's 50-50. So we'll just pay for your car. I was like, man, I dropped the ball on that. Cause like literally he ran red light. He's never been there. And it was like one of those wide, kind of like a wide intersection. And like, yeah, I wish I would have hired you back then. Would have had,
Well, that's the other thing. I think people, if you were to say what's the biggest mistake that people make before a crash, it's that they don't have adequate insurance.
yeah,
That the TV commercials all say, customize your insurance, get what you need, get to select. What they really want to do is they want
just cover your,
to promote for people a $25,000 liability policy. And so
yeah,
you have, and at the same time, people have no idea what uninsured motorist coverage is. They have no idea what excess coverage is, umbrella coverage is. and they don't know that you can, for a very small amount of premium payment, get $10 million worth of coverage that'll protect you from the people who don't have coverage or have these
Hmm.
minimal $25,000 policies. And so, they get hit by the fly-by-night company, or they get hit by a teenager who runs a stop sign and T-bones them, and they're a quadriplegic. And then you turn and say, you know, what kind of coverage do you have? Because you can't just trust, it's just Russian roulette to trust
Yeah.
the person who's got the vehicle. And probably 95% of of drivers out there are underinsured. So if I were to come in, and I tell all of my kids, I have 4 kids, and they're adults now, but I tell them, hey, you need to get the maximum amount of insurance you can get, and you can also do research to determine whether your carrier pays claims. There are a lot of carriers
Yeah.
that don't
Yeah.
pay claims, and they fight them like crazy. So anyway, that's all a pre-suit issue with people, but I would urge them to get proper insurance coverages, and that's something within our firm we understand. So it's not just that it's a catastrophic case. It has to be a case where you can make a meaningful impact for the client, which means that you have to find a deep pocket that's liable. And so we understand coverages, we understand coverages that are on trailers, coverages that are on tractors, umbrella coverages, excess coverages, and we understand all of those layers, how they interact between each other. And you've got to understand that, because you can have insurance companies putting pressure from up above
Yeah.
on the layer that's down below, because if you hit the right layer, the one up above, the insurer that's here owes a fiduciary duty not just to the insured, they owe fiduciary duty to the carrier above them to protect them. And so if it's done properly and you trigger it, the one up here is going to say, settle this case. And if they don't, the one here is going to be on the hook for everything. That all is really important to know. And that's only through years of being in this business and seeing how it works.
Yeah, no, that's a tremendous golden nugget if anyone takes one thing from this. Because yeah, and what you alluded to is they were trying to like, oh, here's a little check for the car repairs, and they were trying to like sign up, and it was like a high-end Mercedes, like 100,000. I'm like, I'm not gonna take pennies on a dollar for it. So they were
Right.
trying to just to cut it off, like you said, as low as possible instead of actually like I'm like, I can't even replace my car for this. So really good no gold nuggets there. What's one client story that still sticks to you for better or worse? Like a story.
Say that one more time.
I'm sorry, yeah. What would be one client story, like an outcome that sticks with you for better or worse?
I did a plane crash case out of Coeur d'Alene that made national news. It was they have a lake, Lake Coeur d'Alene, and there was uh, a plane that had floats on it that would take people up for a ride. You'd pay whatever, $100, and you take your family and you go up. And they had a guy who was joy flying, who was coming up uh, to go to a World War II old warbirds plane, but he had his girlfriend with him. He was known. I watched actually his wake, and they told stories of this guy throwing watermelons out of the plane at people that he knew on the ground at a campsite, and that he could land the plane on. If there was a postage stamp out in the middle of anything, he could land it. He was just this daredevil kind of person. Well, he flew his plane down at about 100 feet above the water, maybe even lower than that, buzzing boats on the ground, maybe trying to impress his girlfriend. And then he soared straight up into the air and went right through the plane that was carrying a whole bunch of tourists that were looking, and killed them all. Everybody died instantly. COVID hit, so NTSB comes in, they begin their investigation. We looked at it, and because we have a pilot, so I represented the family of the pilot. So everybody was suing all the pilots. And I knew as soon as I saw that he was going to need to have insurance defense attorney come defend him. And at the same time, he had a claim. And so I pushed that claim. And it was a very tough case from that standpoint because people were trying to second guess and say that the pilot of the float plane should have been able to avoid it and see it and avoid it. And NTSB actually came to that conclusion. I did not. So we then did reconstructions, put it together, went and found, believe it or not, a host of ring cameras from houses on the water. So we sent out a private investigator who went out and got within eyeshot of that lake. And most people have their houses where their ring camera faces the road side, which is not the lake side. But we did have some that had security cameras on the back side. And with security cameras on the back side, we were able to capture about 7 different images that happened to pick up and record it. And that took, it was an outside chance to try and get that done. But we were then able to identify by zooming in on the boats. We were able to identify in a couple of identifying numbers on the boats. And then we found the boat owners and went and interviewed them. And one of the boat owners happened to have had a GoPro for a water skier. And that water skier caught the plane flying about 50 feet above them and then see it go up into the sky. You don't see the crash. But by piecing all of those together, we were then able to get a really terrific resolution for this spouse. And if you give me 1 second, I'm just going to walk over and grab what to me is one of the more meaningful little plaques that I received. So hang on 1 second. This was the widow. This is an airplane wing. You can see that they show the float plane on it. On it, it says, "May the 4 winds blow you safely home." And so, it just, his wife was a pilot. He was a pilot. He used to teach safety for one of the major airlines. It was his dream to have a plane. And to me, the practice of law, you have recoveries, you have good amounts of money, you have things like that that come in, but it's this kind of thing. When this comes to you afterwards from the widow who had flown into Atlanta, she had a quick stop. As you can see, our office is in downtown Atlanta. So she drove all the way flew into town, drove all the way in. I was in trial, so I wasn't here. I feel awful that I couldn't give her a big hug. But, they went out of their way to do that. And they knew that as soon as I took the case, that it was like it was a labor of love is what it was, because it was a very difficult case, because the easy case would have been to represent the passenger, but they're completely, they have no fault. But when you represent the pilot in a 2-plane collision in midair, the pilots the fingers are pointed at them. And so to me, that's the kind of thing where I turn and say, this is why I practice law. I practice law so that when it's done and you actually have somebody who appreciates it, that they do something so touching, and I will cherish that for the rest of my days.
Love it. Yeah, that's a unfortunate story about just the appreciation from the family. It shows on, makes it rewarding on your end. How do you balance being empathetic while being realistic about the outcomes?
Well, you have to be brutally honest with people. And so they never want to hear, I'm sorry, we've had an adverse ruling and this key piece of evidence is not going to come in. And therefore the value of your case is just is plummeted or taken a big hit. So you have to sit back and say, I have to tell you some news you're not going to want to hear. And sometimes it comes from an adverse ruling. Sometimes it comes from your expert witness. Sometimes it comes from something that the client didn't tell you that they should have. They have an arrest record in the past that should have, if they told you, it would have You could have filed a motion limiting to get it excluded, but then they didn't, and they lied about it in a deposition, and you just have to tell them. So, it it's kind of like a doctor with bedside manner. You have to sometimes come tell somebody, I'm sorry, but we've had a scan that's come in, and here's what the prognosis is. And it's trying to be very straightforward. And sometimes it'll be an issue where there's an insurance coverage dispute. And so you've got a great claim, but one of the carriers is now filed. You can have litigation within litigation. I had one, I was the coordinating counsel for what was known as the Bluffton bus accident in Atlanta. And many people may recall this. It was kind of like Grand Theft Auto, where you get to drive your car off the bridge at 80 miles an hour. This was a bus, a charter bus coming from Bluffton University in Ohio, heading to Florida. They had 45 people on the bus. Was driving all night long from Ohio down to Florida, and at about 5 in the morning, the bus driver was in the HOV lane coming southbound on 75. And when you come into Atlanta, it merges with I-85 for a short period of time before they then separate. So they merge in and then it separates back out. When it merges in, the HOV lane, which had been put in place at the time of the Olympics, had a left turn merge. The driver knew that was coming, but he didn't realize that there was a left turn exit before that merge. And so he went up what was known as Northside Drive's exit at highway speed. He had had some health issues. I'm sure he was tired. We ended up getting evidence to show that he ordered pizza at 11 o'clock at night. They had two drivers, so they stopped and came in. So this guy, if he was ordering pizza at 11 o'clock at night, you got to assume the pizza came 20 minutes later at the earliest. And then he stayed up, and then they got him at like 3 in the morning. So he didn't have much sleep. He mistook this left exit and went up the ramp at highway speeds and went right across this T intersection, went through the barrier wall on the other side, and came right back down onto the highway. And so there were multiple deaths. There were people who had, one kid had serious brain damage, another kid had a broken back. And um, and so you had an awful lot of claims that came forth. And from an insurance standpoint, we looked and said the bus itself only had a $2 million primary and a $3 million excess. Then you had Georgia Department of Transportation had rushed its signage to try and complete the intersection, and so they didn't have their signage in the appropriate way. But they only had 3 million in coverage. So all told, that's only 8 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's not when you have multiple deaths and a whole lot of injuries. So we looked at it and said, this is a private charter bus, but we looked at the university's insurance policies, and the university's insurance policies provided $21 million of coverage, of additional coverage. So we stayed the case in Georgia, went to Ohio, filed an insurance declaratory judgment action against the university's carrier. They defended and said, this doesn't cover a private bus. We lost at the trial court level. We lost at the Court of Appeals, but we won where it mattered, which was at the Ohio Supreme Court. They reversed and said the way the policy was written, it did provide coverage because the coach, and this is just fortuitous, the bus had a DVR on it and it didn't work. And the coach said after they were out for 20 minutes, he said, you got to turn this bus around and go back. And the driver said, okay, I'll go back. And they went back and he swapped out a DVR. And he said, I can't drive with 45 kids all the way down to Florida and spend a week down there and not have the ability to play videos to like placate them while they're on the road. But because of that move, and because when they got to Florida, the coach was able to direct where the bus driver went. That was sufficient control for the university's policies to be kicked. So we had a case that suddenly had $8 million of coverage that had an additional 21 million of coverage. Then we had a mediation at a convention center in Columbus, Ohio. It took 2 days. And during those 2 days, we were able to allocate out money to, and I think pretty effectively to those who were seriously injured, and those whose families had 18 to 22-year-olds who had been killed. So that was a great, rewarding experience. But it's understanding insurance coverage and knowing how to go fight that fight. And I think that's where I would say the business background within my law firm was of great benefit, because we do a lot of insurance coverage as well. And many of those types of cases come from business interruption. You have a hurricane and it wipes out a business's ability to function, and then you have to deal with lost profits, and you have to deal with a lot of different layers of coverage. And so we know that area, and so that to me was a great success.
Yeah, it's actually a perfect segue into my next question. So it almost sounds like based on what you said, but yeah, you've kind of creatively answered it. But are the settlements as big as people think? Do the fees, liens, costs get it up? But I know you kind of alluded to the fact that you guys look at very strategically different angles, and you just kind of give a prime example. But in general, are they as big as people think, or what's kind of like the how is it kind of you know evolve out basically?
So I guess the question you're asking is kind of, do people understand dollars and cents when it comes to the value of a case and what the value of their case is, and how does that fit in with settlement versus trying a case? Is that
Yeah, kind of like based on
you
what people's
stated that?
expectations versus what, ends up happening.
Most people don't know. They don't know. And so they come to you and they just have this horrific loss. They don't understand that they're going to be dropped from their employer is going to drop them. They're going to be on long-term disability for a short period of time, and then eventually they're going to become a ward of the state. So if you become a paraplegic or quadriplegic, or you have a serious spinal injury, um, the I can look at it and have a pretty good sense as to what does their future look like. And if they don't have a really good attorney to try and help fix what can be fixed, and then look into the future to say, hey, wait a second, here's what's going to happen down the road, you can have somebody who, in essence, sells the client down the river. And it's awful because it happens all the time. But people don't initially appreciate what is the cost of healthcare that was taken from them and the cost to them. And most jurors don't quite appreciate that either. And so I spend a great deal of time educating a jury on, this is not a lottery. This is not on what is this person going to make where they think it's some windfall. This is on what has been taken from this person. If you had been somebody who had not been in pain, and because of the negligence of somebody else, it's not a accident's a really bad word, because that kind of sounds like it was nobody's fault. It happens because somebody wasn't paying attention when they were driving an 18-wheeler, and they merged into a lane and they didn't use their mirrors, or they just thought might makes right and I need to force my way in, and they cause mayhem for somebody. And what happens is their health is taken from them, and when it's taken forever. And so you have a lot of cases where initially somebody may just have pain, and they go in and they get an x-ray, and the x-ray doesn't show that anything was broken. And so they start to go through conservative treatment, which is what happens in every case, and they're hoping the body will heal itself. Well, once they go through physical therapy and they say it still hurts, then they send them off to get an MRI or a CT scan, which kind of shows bony structures, and an MRI that really starts to show detail, or a traumatic brain injury. I have a brain injury case where the person would pass the elevator test. You could ride in the elevator with this person and say, hey, how's it going? And they go, oh, it's fine. How are you doing? What's the weather like? They could talk all that. You start to talk to that person and ask them any kind of detail, and they will repeat themselves. and their ability to think cognitively is gone. Their personality will have changed. The person is no longer the person that they were beforehand, and they will have balance issues, they will have cognitive thinking issues, and that is a forever injury that is hard to see. And it's very hard. You have to express that kind of an injury with experts who come in, and you have to bring in before and after witnesses. And particularly, the best witnesses for somebody like that are going to be the people who didn't really know them. I had a case with a traumatic brain injury and trying to express what is the true nature of who this person was before and after. And it was the dry cleaning um, attendant who received this person's dry cleaning. And the person used to come in and was very thoughtful, and they would chat, very chatty, positive, et cetera. Then after the injury, when the person came in, it was like he didn't even recognize that it's the same person. He didn't remember any of the conversations they'd had before, et cetera. That witness became really important to me because it wasn't like it was the person's mom, the person's brother, the person, somebody else. It was somebody who was completely objective that could come forth. And so anyway, when people say, what is the value of that? To me, I would say that's priceless. But in terms of looking to say, what does Georgia law say? Well, Georgia law sets forth a series of factors, and you have to be able to put that forth, and then you have to be able to deal with the defense. And the defense will try and say this is a money grab, that people exaggerate their injuries. And so you have to be able to come in to say, I know they're going to do that. I know that there are going to be some people on the jury who are heartless, or maybe not heartless, but they're going to be suspicious. And they have every right to be suspicious because we got those billboards and we've got all these commercials of get the money you deserve, et cetera. But if you understand that's what's going to happen, you then go in to say, well, the MRI doesn't lie. And now they have what's known as a TDI, which is diffuse tensor technology, which is an MRI for the brain that will show areas of the brain that are no longer functioning. Without that technology to come forth, you really just have the person sitting there and a jury looking saying, he doesn't look that hurt, And so those kind of injuries are perhaps the hardest ones to prove. And they're the ones in which you've got to let the jury know that this is a forever injury. And it is, who would want to say, hey, I'll go put a big bucket of money out here, but you take my brain away. you know, you take my ability to reason, to enjoy, to laugh, to appreciate a sense of humor, to no longer have tinnitus inside of your head, all of those things. And you just have to be able to show it through expert testimony, through imaging that doesn't lie. The MRI doesn't lie. The DTI doesn't lie. You can be able to show, hey, here is what is causing the pain now. And it's a fight. It's a battle in every one of those cases. And it's in large part because you have tremendous amounts of money coming from the insurance industry to try and make it appear as though you just need to suck it up and move on, instead of, no, wait, we shouldn't have this person become a ward of the state. This person should be taken care of. And you, the jury, can help fix that. You can help bring that person to level, but then afterwards you have to turn and say, what was taken from this person is so precious, and it's a forever kind of precious injury. So that's the part that I find challenging and is very rewarding to help.
Yeah, you can't put a price on health or with the quality of life. And speaking of technology, it's a nice segue. Are you seeing more cases involving distracted drivers using their cell phones?
Not only that, but you can prove it now. So, the very first thing that happens in a case is you don't just send out a discovery request to the phone company, because the phone company is not going to really be able to show you what was going on with their phone at that time. There was a case recently in Georgia where the person hit a series of cars, stopped. He was in a big commercial vehicle, hit a series of vehicles, stopped at a stop sign on a highway that was starting to come into a rural area. to an urban area in a rural environment where it had a stop sign that brought everybody to stop, and he hit them at 68 miles an hour. Well, his cell phone showed that he was on Facebook at the time. So, there's another case in Georgia where there was an app that would be able to share how fast you were driving, and in essence encourage people. And the person, when she hit the other vehicles, was doing 110 miles an hour and had the app up and running on her vehicle. So it's happening. The interesting thing is going to be what happens when technology finally does improve self-automated driving cars. And there are some automated driving cars where there's some famous oopsies that have occurred, where there's a case in Texas where a self-automated car drove into the abutment of a bridge, and the person was on his Game Boy playing because he trusted the technology. But it happens, and it happens an awful lot. I think the laws in the various states that have said you may not text and drive, and you have to have no hands-free have helped considerably. But we immediately look not just to going to the phone company, but we look to try and get a download of a phone so you can have searches done by third-party vendors to search. Because if you're just asking the person who had the phone, were you on the phone, or even their counsel, most of their counsel, they just trust the client, say, send it to me. And you really need to have a third-party vendor where you get a mirror image made of the phone. Then you work out what are called ESI protocols, which are electronic storage information, search terms, and that can happen in a myriad of different ways. Courts can come in if they think that there has been evidence that someone has withheld information. The court itself can appoint a vendor to come and examine the phone. So a lot of key evidence comes from that data.
Yeah, I love it. This is great context there. Kind of gave me a background too. So it's been very educational.
Yeah, right.
Lots of golden nuggets on this. Steve, I know you alluded to the fact you're selective in the type of cases, and what would be the best way for people to contact you? Is it through your website, or how can people find out more about you?
Sure. What I would say is they can contact me through my law firm website, and then within my bio, I have a link to my personal injury side. So at www.fellab, F as in Frank, ELLAB.com. And then within that website, it'll say attorneystephenlabriola.com. Either one of those, our phone number is 404-586-9200. My direct dial is 2020. And I always give, I won't do it here, but I always give to every client my cell number. And that's because I'm not a volume practice. I've never had it abused by clients, but I want to be reachable. I want to, you cannot have an attorney where you are hiring them and it's some underling who is the one who is the only contact person. And that's the benefit, I think, of doing nothing but catastrophic injuries, is that you're dealing with the person who has done the experience, and you're not dealing with just a paralegal or with a junior associate who has been out of law school for 2 years and trying to find out, where is the courthouse. So I make myself accessible, and I pride myself on returning calls every day if I can, and if not, within 24 hours.
Perfect. Yeah, no, that's I love it. Personal touch with exclusivity. So that's a nice way to wrap it up. Thank you so much for being on Commentary Podcast.
Absolutely appreciate it, and look forward to actually hearing the podcast when it airs.
Yep, sounds good. Thank you.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Counsel and Commentary. This episode has been brought to you by the top attorneys of North America.